Hello, everyone, and welcome to our panel today. Thank you, United Way of Central Ohio, for inviting this conversation and really encouraging an honest look of what's happening here in our city, or in our state, if you will. Let's start off with some introductions, as I see some folks logging on. And joining us, my name is Erin Upchurch. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Executive Director of Kaleidoscope Youth Center and the moderator for today. And then if I could ask Siobhan to please introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Happy Pride. My name is Siobhan Boyd Nelson. My pronouns are she, her, and I have the pleasure of serving Equality Ohio Education Fund as the Deputy Director. We are a statewide organization with staff in Columbus, Cleveland, and Cincinnati, Ohio.
Thank you. Tim, would you like to go next?
Sure thing. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tim Johnson, pronouns he, him, and I am a policy advocate with the Ohio Poverty Law Center. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And Tom.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Thomas Grote. I am the Chief Catalyst at the Edge Innovation Hub, which is an innovation center for our Grote family businesses, including Donato's Pizza and some manufacturing stuff and some other startups. And I'm a startup guy. Actually was the founding board chair for Equality Ohio and led the startup funding and staffing. So I love all the startup stuff, but anyway, that's what I do. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for including me.
Absolutely. And just to get folks on the same page, I'm just going to briefly show you what we're talking about today. So House Bill 616 was introduced in April by Reb Schmidt and Lloyd Check. And it wants to amend the Ohio Revised Code around the promotion and teaching of divisive or inherently racist concepts in public schools. Here's a list of the things that the ban would include. Divisive or inherently racist concepts, which includes critical race theory, intersectional theory, the 1619 Project, diversity, equity, and inclusion learning outcomes, inherited racial guilt, and any other concept that the State Board of Education defines as divisive or inherently racist in accordance with the rules adopted. Won't go into this too deeply because I know our panelists will talk about it, but just for a brief overview and looking at CRT and intersectional theory in the 1619 Project, you can see what it includes. Many things that are typically taught in history lessons and some things that are left out based on our own experiences. It would also include banning with respect to a student in any of grades, kindergarten through third grade, to teach, use, or provide any curriculum or instructional materials on sexual orientation or gender identity. Also, with respect to students in the grades 4 through 12, would ban teaching, using, or providing any curriculum or instructional materials on sexual orientation or gender identity in any manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with these new state standards. That's a lot in there, right? And then just again, to level set, everyone has a gender identity. Everyone has a sexual orientation. And so I'm going to pause there and invite you all, as we are talking throughout the day, feel free to ask questions and put them in the chat. We also have some space left at the end to have some Q&A discussion. So let's get started. To our panelists, why should we care about House Bill 616? I will let you all popcorn in. I don't want to call on folks if you don't feel like you have something to say.
Sure, I guess I'll go ahead and get started. What worries me the most about House Bill 616, and there's a lot that can be said for this legislation and other bills like it, because it's not the only one that's been introduced in the General Assembly with these ideas of quote unquote divisive topics. But what worries me the most as someone who doesn't even have children is that, today's kids are tomorrow's leaders, right? Somewhere in August, September of this year, the next governor of the state of Ohio is going to put on a backpack and get on a bus and go to school. Someone is going to be, who's a school-age child right now, will be your next, county commissioner, your next city council person, your next Ohio president or Senate president, your next Ohio House Speaker. And they are going to shape and form policy based on the life experiences that they've had and the education that they had. And so when they hear that some terms are quote unquote inherently racist, when they hear that some things like gender identity and sexual orientation are not appropriate to be taught in school, they're going to carry that with them. And the policy that they make and the decisions that they make and the way they view the world will be shaped by House Bill 616. So you will see that play out in decades to come as people who, if this bill were to pass, are making important decisions based off of things that they learned in school today.
Thank you, Tim.
I think Tim really said it. I also think about the mental health of our young people. Not only are these going to be young people who one day shape policy, these are young people who are just going to be everyday citizens and part of our societies. And we need, I think that all of us want a society that is mentally healthy. And it is not, the things that are proposed in this legislation are not going to promote mental health in our young people. It's not going to promote mental health in our young people of color because it's not going to allow them to have a true reflection of who they are and what their history is in this country. It's also not going to be an appropriate reflection or any reflection of our LGBTQ plus young people. And we know that when you are not reflected in life, in society, it creates a sense of isolation. And we know that isolation leads to very poor outcomes, particularly for our LGBTQ plus youth. So really the HB 616 endangers the mental health and well-being of every young person today, in addition to creating adults who do not have an appropriate framework with which to shape and create policy for our future.
Thank you.
And I will just add, and by the way, my pronouns are he, him. Sorry, I missed those. I apologize for that. I mean, Aaron, as you go through all the points, you drop your jaw and you just go, what the heck? I mean, what is going on here? This is nuts. And exactly what is going on here is it's politically driven. And this is not a conversation. This is a weapon. This is about, this bill causes hurt and harm. Even proposing this bill causes hurt and harm to our LGBTQ community and our people of color community. It is ridiculous. And it is so egregious. And we've seen this story before, so it's not that many of us that have been involved for a very long time, we see this story, which it is find something to scare the crap out of people and then go in with a hammer and hit everybody over the head and get us riled up and scare us to death. And it is so bad. And it is a national strategy. It's a political strategy for the midterms. 1 year it's the bathroom bill, it's picking on our trans community, and it's scaring the shit out of parents and calling it parental rights. And it's a lie. It's just filled with lies. It's sad and it's hurtful. And I have I'm a married gay man. I have two daughters, a 13-year-old and a 10-year-old. Other people on this panel have children as well. We all know I take that role very seriously as a parent, and I'm so happy and proud that my children are in a school that's supportive of me and my husband and our different family. I have two Black children that in this particular school, they do talk about race. They do talk about sexual orientation. They do acknowledge my family and the differences, and they make us feel welcome. And to think that the state is going to come in and get them in the middle between me and my kids at my school, and get in the middle between the school board and tell them what we can and can't talk about in our class, and and it's just, so I have a little emotion behind this. I know that the other panelists are holding back and biting their tongues, but I can't help it. It's just hurtful. And, go back, and I'll finish up by just saying it's the same story, and back 30 years ago, it was all gay people were pedophiles and we were trying to groom your children. That's what they said about us. And then they started to try to pass laws to not let gay people teach. And it's just the same stuff. So I guess that's why we should care, is because it's hurtful, it harms people, and even proposing this legislation is harmful and hurtful, and it, sad about it. I'm just really sad.
Absolutely. The word absurd keeps coming to mind. And when I read those things, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's too much here. I'm like, well, wait, I didn't put it there. They did. It feels absurd. And Siobhan, I want to just quickly, I know Equality Ohio has been leading the charge in terms of talking points and messaging. And one of the things that you all have done is have framed the bill as don't say gay, don't mention race. Can you talk just briefly about why it's important that we lift up both ends and talk about how this is intersectional in nature?
Well, it's right there in the bill. They don't even want to recognize our intersectionality. The idea, I just want to start there, the idea that recognizing intersectionality as a concept when it exists as a reality, and that we can't recognize it as a concept, is absolutely absurd. And it's trying to erase, it's trying to erode the coalition that is building, the relationships that are building between Black communities and communities of color and LGBTQ plus communities, because we are recognizing our intersectionality. And really, this bill is attacking both. That's why we have to talk about both, because there is so much at stake. And we know when they come for one of us, they come for all of us. And this bill really encapsulates that in one place. So yes, and the proponents of the bill have said, well, we're not saying you can't mention race, and we're not saying that you can't say gay. But you are, and you are, and then so that's a little bit tongue-in-cheek on their part and disingenuous on their part. When we can't talk about, well, let's take we've already talked about intersectionality, let's take the 1619 Project. When we can't talk about I think it's a Pulitzer Prize winning body of journalism in our schools, that in no way, let me be very clear here, CRT, intersectionality, 1619 Project, and I teach on these things, I use these things in my own training. There is absolutely no concept of what is it, inherited racial guilt. I've never heard that term until I read it in here. That's not a term that is used. It's not a concept that is used. It's not about inherited racial guilt. It's about understanding how this country was actually formed, how these systems were actually formed, and how they actually play out, and seeing what you don't see. That's all we're asking folks to do, is to see what they don't see. And then when it comes, so that's on the race side. So these are not racist things. We're just asking people to recognize racism and to talk explicitly, honestly, and openly about it. That itself is not racist. That might be uncomfortable. And let's be clear here. Yes, we are talking about concepts that make people uncomfortable. But since when have we used the Ohio Legislature and the Ohio Revised Code to legislate someone's sense of discomfort? That's not progress. That's not how we create society. That's not how we move forward as a community. And then on the don't say gay side. So there's we're not saying you can't say gay. We're saying that you just can't talk about these concepts in a non-developmentally appropriate way. Well, let's talk about that. What's developmentally appropriate? Well, the American Academy of Pediatrics tells us that by the age of 4, every young person has a sense of their gender identity, has a sense of whether or not they are a boy or a girl, whether or not they're saying it or how they're expressing it. Okay, but that's what the American Academy of Pediatrics is telling us. So why can't we talk about gender identity with kindergarten through 3rd graders? And that's and the fear here is that we're talking about sex. We're trying, because it's back to what Tom was saying before, because all the old words have come out again: pedophiles and groomers. And I read one of the Representative Click was recently on Bruce Hooley's show. And there was conversation about how the true gay agenda is to make pedophilia legal. That's what we're out here. That is the true gay agenda, is to make pedophilia legal. And folks know the gay agenda is survival. Let's be very clear right now. The gay agenda is survival. There is nothing sexual about gender identity. It's about who you know yourself to be. And talking to young people in the ages of kindergarten through third grade about who they are and who they know themselves to be, and supporting that development of that sense of self, is what kindergarten through third grade are for. So we need to be doing that work in those spaces, and we need to be honest about what gender identity and sexual orientation are. And they are not pornographic conversations. They are not sexual conversations. They are conversations about a person's identity.
Thank you so much for that. And even the idea of sexual orientation is kind of a misnomer, right? Because it is more than. So they're sexualizing a sense of identity and who you like to spend time with or might have a crush on. And all those things happen. I don't know about y'all. I have children, and I remember in kindergarten them coming home like, that's my best friend. I want to marry them. And it was just because they were experiencing an overwhelming sense of love and affection towards somebody. So thank you so much for that. And you did mention developmentally appropriate. So we know what the Association of Pediatrics says. I know in childhood development, we know what the text says. Tom, I'm going to ask you as a parent, when you think of developmentally appropriate for your girls, what does that mean for you?
Oh my gosh. That's really hard. I was actually having a conversation with my daughter today in the car, who's 10. And last night there was some stuff that came on the TV. I was watching Love, Victor. And I had to shut her out. I had to put my hands over her eyes a couple times, and then I had to ask her to leave the room. And I was thinking about development. That's obviously what is development, and so I had a conversation with her in the car this morning. I was talking to her about sex and, in an age appropriate way, and just trying to have some very honest, open conversation. And it was really great. It's tricky and it's hard at all levels, but the bottom line is not to put shame around stuff, not to frame stuff like I kept saying, you know what, she's a really smart kid. We can have this conversation, I can trust that we can have this conversation and understand that it's out of love and it's out of learning. And so that's developmentally appropriate to me, is to trust children to have a conversation that's at a level that makes sense, right, for them. That is development. And who makes that decision as to what is development? I mean, are we going to have the state decide in every school at every age what, in that type of context, what is developmentally appropriate to talk about sexual orientation and gender identity and race? I mean, really? Who gets to decide that, right? I say get that as close to the children as possible.
So it sounds like what you're saying is, if I'm hearing you correctly, that it might make sense to follow evidence-based practices and recommendations of doctors, child development specialists, social workers, counselors, folks who do this as a living and actually know what they're talking about. Am I correctly summarizing part of what you said?
Thank you.
But Erin, can I piggyback off of that? And I'm so sorry, I don't want to leave Tim out of this conversation, but I want folks to recognize and know that our state legislature has no responsibility or no obligation to follow experts, medical experts in any sense. And the reason we know this is because a few years ago, there was an Ohio Supreme Court case, and it was actually about our outdated and archaic HIV laws here in Ohio. And so the argument was made, you can't actually transmit HIV in this way. We know this medically, scientifically. We know that this is not possible. So treating this as a harmful act in the Ohio Revised Code shouldn't be allowed. And our Ohio Supreme Court ruled that our legislature does not have to use medical or scientific information, knowledge, experts, anything in their legislation. That's what the Supreme Court said. And I want to say, we are actually the final arbiters of that and what our legislator has to use and whether or not they have to legislate according to medical and scientific standards. And we do that through the voting booth.
Yeah, and I'll just pop in real quick to say, as was pointed out, they are under no obligation to follow any of that information. And as a former employee of the state legislature, they don't oftentimes. And so what should worry folks is, well, then what will they follow? And how will they determine what is developmentally appropriate? Is that something that will fall to the state school board, which is an inherently political body also with appointed members from the governor and elected officials? So it should worry folks that if they're not going to take what the literature and research says, who are they going to listen to and how are they going to implement that if House Bill 616 were to pass?
I really appreciate that. You know, I'm a licensed social worker in the state of Ohio, and I had to go to graduate school. I had to get a license. I have to take continuing education every 2 years to renew that license just to be able to practice. And I have to stay within my scope of practice. And so when you think about those of us who are providing care in different ways, who have to be licensed and there's this governing body, it feels like, and as we're all saying in agreement here, that people who are out of their scope shouldn't be practicing. Like I could actually lose my license and it could be a felony if I practice out of my scope. And we see our state legislature doing the same thing. And I think it's really important to continue talking about, we do have some power, as you said, Siobhan, in voting, you know, and as parents and caregivers and just citizens to talk about like, this is not okay. So Tim, I want to start with you. If this bill is passed, what concerns you most? What impact concerns you most?
I think there's a couple things that worry me about this bill. One is, and this was brought up in the mental health section, but what does it do to young people to hear from their state government that their history or their sexual orientation or gender identity is something that is considered divisive and not to be talked about? That's very worrisome to me. I can't imagine what it would be like to be told, for instance, if you were one of Tom's daughter, that his family structure is inherently divisive and something that can't be discussed in the classroom, while another child or and their family is acceptable and is something that can be discussed. I can't imagine what that does to a person's psyche and how they feel about themselves and their family and the people they surround them with. The other thing I'm worried about is sort of a practical thing, is how will this actually work if it were to pass? So for example, you provided, I think, a couple very good definitions of things like intersectionality and critical race theory. And those are good definitions. They're not in the bill though. The bill doesn't actually define what critical race theory is, what intersectionality is, what diversity, equity, and inclusion learning outcomes are. But our teachers are expected to not teach these things. And if you've been following along with the debate around these issues, those terms tend to be or have meaning whatever folks want them to be. So if I think something is critical race theory, then to me it is. And so in this bill, it would set up an entire process for parents to complain about what's happening in the classroom. So if I'm a teacher, am I looking at the academic definition of critical race theory to make sure I'm not doing that? Or am I imagining what a parent might think maybe critical race theory means? Am I imagining what maybe the superintendent of public instruction, who is responsible for coming up with a determination of I violated the law, what they think critical race theory means or what intersectionality means? And how will that affect exactly what I do and say in my classroom? And I would argue that those definitions are left out on purpose to make teachers afraid to say things. And so that's going to lead, I think, to a far less robust, interesting, and critical discussions of things that are happening in the classroom. And I think that's by design. So that's something else that really worries me about the bill. It's just how it's actually going to affect how our teachers approach teaching.
Thank you for that. And definitely leaves room for bias, right? Some people might not even care to know the definitions. It's just whatever they think it is too.
Exactly.
Tom, what concerns you most?
I think it's fear. It's just scaring people. It's scaring teachers. It's scaring school boards. And when you're scaring people, they tend to step backwards
Mhm.
and sometimes not do what they know in their heart is the right thing to do. That's best for the kids. That's best for helping them learn and grow and be the most healthy kids they possibly can be. And so it's just that spreading of fear, and then to actually become law, and it's putting a hammer to it then too. And how it can be, that hammer can indiscriminately be used by people with really just a different set of values, not that don't align with the parents' values or the school board's values or the community's values. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. And Siobhan?
I take a very personal take to this question. What worries me is that my son is going to choose to live somewhere else other than Ohio. My son is a sophomore in college. He's actually studying to be an early education teacher right now. And I'm afraid that if this bill passes, he will choose to teach somewhere else. He will choose not to live here in the state of Ohio. And that makes me very sad. I love my kid and I'd really love for him to be close by. But I also completely understand, because of the horrible things in this bill for teachers, that if they cross a line or if they say something that is then carried home by a 6-year-old, and let's think about how 6-year-olds carry messages home. If they carry a message home to a 6-year-old that is not liked by a parent, my son is at jeopardy of losing his license. And I can't imagine telling him to go to college, do all this work, to earn this credential, to do this amazing job, and then your license is in jeopardy every day if you're not walking on eggshells and monitoring everything that comes out of your mouth. That just sounds absolutely horrendous. And I can't believe that we are putting that type of pressure on our teachers who are just coming out of a pandemic. I mean, it's just absolutely unthinkable. And then secondarily, I will say that what worries me is the impact that this has on Central Ohio. We're doing great here in Central Ohio, right? We have kind of turned around a little bit this whole brain drain thing, at least right here in Central Ohio. We've got amazing companies that are seeing our community as an attractive community and one that they want to come to, and folks, and there's a lot of growth here. And we could see action by the state stymie the growth that Central Ohio has worked so hard to build this momentum. And that makes me so sad. And I really hope that we don't allow that to happen.
Thank you for that, and especially that personal take. I honestly, having 2 young adults, I never considered that either. And also it's a workforce development issue, and it's an economic issue, because we're going to lose great talent, whether it's people who are here and they're getting educated at one of our, wonderful universities, they're going to leave. But it also might stop folks from coming home. And we talk about that from an economic perspective and workforce development. That definitely has, the potential for some really great impact. I see that some folks have asked what they can do, and that is definitely one of the things I'd love for each of you to talk about in your own spheres, whether it's your work life, community groups, your own personal advocacy. What are some things that you're doing? And what are some things that folks can join you in doing?
I'll jump in just because I work for an advocacy org, and we've always got something that you can do. We really are focusing on voting. And so one of the things that you can be doing is talking about voting in November. It's a very important election, and we need everyone to get registered and to vote like you love an LGBTQ plus person. That's really the reality. If you love an LGBTQ plus person, if there's an LGBTQ plus family in your life, then vote like it. That's the first thing that you can do. Second, another thing that you can do is celebrate and make things visible. We can celebrate. If you, right now, there are, I think we're above 86 Pride celebrations across the state of Ohio this year, and they're lasting through October. So if you have not been to a Pride celebration, Columbus Pride, it starts tomorrow. You should get out there. You should be celebrating. You should be helping to make this community visible. And then with Blackout and Proud, I'll lift up that organization in particular. We in particular want to make the Black LGBTQ plus community visible and celebrate the beauty of the community. So come on out and join us for those events, so that because that's super intersectional, y'all. And we need to celebrate that intersectionality, let folks know that it's visible. So here's the thing, if we're not going to see this visibility, if we're not going to have this celebration in our classrooms, then we have to make sure that it's happening in the rest of the community. That really is our responsibility.
Thank you. Would you mind putting maybe a link for Blackout and Proud in the chat if folks want to follow you all? Tim or
Yeah, and another thing you can always do that I always encourage folks, if they feel comfortable doing, is talk to your legislator, right? Like these bills don't deserve to pass without public input. One of the things the Ohio Poverty Law Center has been busy doing, myself, and I've been working with the Honesty for Ohio Education Coalition, which was formed around this issue, is to train folks to testify on House Bill 616 and other similar bills. So they can come to the State House or submit written testimony and make sure that their voices are heard. There was another bill that is similar, but not quite the same to House Bill 616, House Bill 327. And through the work with the Honesty for Ohio Education Coalition, over 100 people signed up to testify in person. And that outpouring was so significant, it gave a lot of the members who wanted to push this bill a little bit of pause and some pushback. And so your voice does matter. If you are interested in learning how to testify and what that looks like, you can always reach out to me and I'd be happy to plug you all in. But bills this divisive, bills this harmful, don't deserve to pass without members of the public being allowed to add their voice in. So always encourage folks to stand up and make yourself known if that's something you're interested in doing.
thank you.
I'll just add, that was great, Tim and Siobhan. I would just add conversation. And unfortunately, HB 616 is not a conversation. It's a hammer, it's a punishment. It's trying to scare people. But conversation is necessary. And I will just acknowledge from the time that I grew up to now that my girls are in school, and I'm really old. So, but I can imagine of having come out as a middle schooler, high schooler, and then the progress we've made around trans issues is an education is amazing, but still so far to go. And my daughter, who's entering the 8th grade, has a friend who came out as trans at a Columbus School for Girls, and it was treated as a fantastic opportunity to educate the girls, to educate parents, to educate teachers. It's been handled beautifully. And I can understand that when we're coming from a place of an old world view where we haven't yet been fully educated on these issues, that folks can get scared. And then the first thing you do when you get scared is that reptilian brain kicks in, right? And bad things happen. So my biggest thing is to have conversations with those around you, everyone you can, and use your circle, all of us using our circles of influence at every level to have that conversation. Make sure folks know about this bill, and then talk about these issues and give folks a little bit of room to have a conversation. The finger pointing doesn't help. The shaming other people for their viewpoints doesn't help, but really try to get where they're at and have a conversation about it and maybe get a little education. And even if this bill passes, which I really don't think it's going to, if we do what we need to do, but if it does, this is a long game. This is a long game, and we will keep telling the truth, and we will keep loving these kids.
Absolutely. I appreciate what each of you said. And, I would be remiss not to mention from a KYC Kaleidoscope Youth Center perspective, yes, talk to representatives, yes, get educated, yes, do all of these things. And I want to say, love on our young folks. They need to know that people have their back. If you have a young person in your family and they're coming out or asking questions, you get, wow, what a privilege. You get to say, thank you for telling me. Thank you for trusting me. Even if you don't understand it all, go learn on your own. But you get to show that love. You get to show up for those groups and organizations. And also our Black and Brown youth, because although we know this is intersectional, it also can separately impact the LGBT community, and it can separately impact Black and Brown communities, right? So there's all this intersection, and there's also, I guess, an autonomous space of autonomy, but really being able to communicate that as community members. And I think another question I want to ask here is, a lot of things that I've noticed when people talk about this bill is almost trying to defend the humanity and dignity of queer folks, of Black and brown folks. And that's beautiful, because that's the impulse. Like, you're not on my watch, you're not going to talk about my people. But really, the issue is the legislators and the sponsors. They're the ones who are wrong. And that's, today you all lifted up about them being out of scope. And they're actually the ones who are being divisive, right? And so do you have some ways that folks can, and I know I'm asking you for sound bites essentially, but ways that people can feel confident when they talk about this bill to really direct the attention where it needs to go?
I think that when you're talking about any bill, and let's say that talking about legislation in, at the bar, in random conversations with your friends, it's something I do. It's not something everybody wants to do or is good at. And it's something that we have to do when it's something as outrageous as this, right? We have to normalize having these conversations. I think what I would recommend is figuring out where it hits you. You really have to humanize it. And talking about these things in the third person, talking about these, hypothetical situations is where we kind of get into the mud and we get into the mire. So I would really encourage people to think about can this bill impact you, impact the people that you know that are in your life, and move from that space. For me, I have a lot of just ideals and theories and reasons why I am very upset about this bill. But really for me, it's how is my son he chose an amazing area to go into as a young Black man, becoming a teacher of young children. We need more of them. And then to have this new barrier put up for him just feels so horrible. So I think that there are, because this bill is so all encompassing, because it hits on so many different things, there's something in here that each of us, that's going to impact each of our lives. So I'd encourage you to find that thing, sit with it, and then speak from the heart, come from that space, because you can't go wrong with those arguments.
Love that. The power of your personal story. Tom and Tim, do you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, if you can tell a personal story when discussing things with people, I mean, it goes so much further, and it goes a lot further in the legislature too. So when you're talking with other members who maybe aren't as familiar with this bill or haven't had a big discussion about it and aren't the sponsors of this bill, being able to humanize legislation to legislators and talk about the impact it's going to have on you or your loved ones personally is often the most moving thing you can do for them, because it allows them to see themselves or their loved ones in a similar situation. And it can affect change in a way that simply citing statistics or things like that just simply can't do. So that's wonderful advice.
Thank you.
So it's 1, 2, 3, same theme, right? It is, the personal story is the most powerful thing we can possibly do, to share, to make ourselves vulnerable, to try to connect with others. I agree 100%. And for me, my share is just that I have 2 girls thriving right now in an environment where they're embraced, uplifted. Their differences are acknowledged. Nothing's perfect, but it's pretty darn good. And I see them thriving. I had a terrible self-esteem growing up, and I had some pretty life-threatening things happen for me. And my daughters are not in that situation. They are, my 13-year-old is smiling, and that is hard to do, right, Erin?
Yes.
But I'm watching him thrive, and that's the story I would tell, is the success of a school environment that embraces them, and the trans person, her trans friend. Can you imagine how that could have gone? Imagine the opposite that could have happened. And I just think nothing bad happened here. Everybody it's a good thing that's happening. And so tell the good stories too, and what can be.
Can I add something else, Erin? I would say that also Google is your friend. So there is absolutely no excuse for not being educated about the different concepts in this bill. So if there's anything in this bill where you're like, I don't know, maybe critical race theory is bad, you can find critical race theory. It's out there. Like you can find it, and you can find reputable sources to find information on critical race theory, intersectionality. You can listen to the 1619 Project for yourself. You can read it. You can read stories of trans youth. You can read stories of trans youth here in Ohio. There is information out there. So if there is anything here in this bill that is confusing to you, or you're thinking to yourself, well, I just don't know anything about that, I can't have a conversation there, I want to challenge you to go ahead and dig in and do the education. Because even if we can fight this bill, and even if we kill this bill, these are still issues in our community. These are still issues in our society. The fact that it's gotten to this point, the fact that there's this much conversation happening around it, means that these are things that are happening and that you should be educated on as a member of our society. So I just really want to encourage people, if there's anything you don't understand about trans identity, about sexual orientation development, it's there. It's not what you learned in high school. I just want to say that again. Can I say that really loud? The science is not what you learned in high school. And I'm saying that as someone who graduated from high school, 15, almost 20 years ago. So yeah, it's not what you learned in high school. It has evolved since then. Catch up with us, get into it.
I definitely appreciate that, and I can say as an adult, and I've experienced this as a practitioner working at KYC, and even as a parent, one of the best feelings I get, and the things that make me feel the most tender, is to see a young person fully embrace who they are and that freedom. I can say this, from having a Black daughter who I watched her over the pandemic around her hair, right? And she started wearing her hair natural during that time, in braids and that. And for those of you who are not familiar, and this is another panel, but like our hair is a thing. And to see her just embrace that, it's I don't know that you can want more for a young person than something like that. When I'm at KYC and I see a young person who maybe comes in guarded and doesn't know anyone, and a week later they want to lead a community advocacy project because they feel seen, right? And even just as recent, we had a Pride celebration, and 11-year-old was there. She was there Friday night for an open house. And 24 hours later, she came to our Pride celebration with her friends. Less than 24 hours, she went and talked about it. And her dad said, "It's the smile for me. I haven't seen that in a long time." And just like you said, Tom, to see our young people smile, whether they belong to you formerly or not, I don't know that there's anything that can be more impactful than doing that. And so we think about these bills and how they are divisive. It's essentially taking away those opportunities for our youth to smile. So very tender here talking about that. I want to invite folks, there is a question here around this bill qualifying as a violation of freedom of speech or censorship for educators. I'm going to refer to my law friend here, Siobhan, and see if you have any information about that.
I think there's definitely an argument to be made there. I would be surprised to see this bill passed and not be challenged in the courts, honestly, on any number of grounds. So I don't think that if the bill passes, the argument is over by any stretch of the imagination, and that there are a number of things here. Not only is it a violation of free speech, but it really puts, I think, our educators and our professionals in a really tough position, as many of these anti-LGBTQ plus bills in our state do, where their ethics are going to rub up against what the state of Ohio is telling them they can and cannot say. And so that's going to be another thing that's showing up here and in other bills. So I would be very surprised not to see a lawsuit filed by someone on some grounds or multiple.
Thank you for that. I wanted to take this moment and interview folks. I know you've been asking some questions throughout, but if there are any other questions that have come up, or you've just something you want to share, please feel free to put that in the chat so that we can have our panelists talk about that a bit more. And while we kind of sit and we wait for that, for your questions, I want to ask you all, if you if you have one thing or maybe two things that you would want to say to the sponsors of this bill or the supporters, what would that be?
Sure. I think the first thing I would say is stop, right? Stop with House Bill 616. It's unnecessary, it's hurtful, it's harmful. The sponsors, in the very limited amount of discussion they have been willing to do on 616, because they have not been willing to talk about this in the media or anywhere, in some cases, literally running from questions about House Bill 616. They try to frame it as a bill to protect children and restore parental rights. And there are actually things they can do to help those things. We know that, for instance, LGBTQ students are more likely to be bullied in school, to be verbally harassed, to not be allowed to use bathrooms that correspond with their gender identity, to not be referred to by their preferred pronouns, to face discipline outside of what is normal for public displays of affection that non-LGBTQ students face. So you could look at those issues. You could do things like looking at the Ohio Fairness Act, which has been hanging around the legislature for almost 2 decades now, and is still not passed. So there are actual things you can do that protect people, but House Bill 616 isn't it. So you should stop with that and look at ways you can actually be helpful.
So Tim, just real quick, are you maybe suggesting that if we choose to, as a community, to affirm young folks, LGBTQ young folks, BIPOC young folks, just people in general, and show positive aspects of their lives, provide education, do you think there could be a decrease in some of that bullying and those unsafe situations in schools?
I absolutely do. And I think all the research that exists shows that. And in fact, bills like this are probably more likely to ostracize those students and increase bullying behavior and put them in more danger on top of affecting their mental health than it is to do anything to quote unquote protect them, like the sponsors of the bill believe that it will. So yes, absolutely. Affirming who they are, supporting who they are, celebrating who they are all important things that they could actually do to really help protect students in schools rather than pass House Bill 616 and continue to advocate for it.
Thank you. Siobhan or Tom?
Oh dear, did I just, okay. And I would say to them, I would actually ask a question, because recently our legislators and most of the ones who I think are supportive of this type of legislation also supported a House bill or legislation that would allow local school boards to decide whether or not their teachers can be armed. And I watched the hearings on that legislation, and a really big issue that they were talking about is that all we're trying to do is give local school boards the choice of whether or not to have armed teachers or not. The state is not saying that all teachers need to be armed. It is up to every local school board. So if Columbus City Schools does not want armed teachers, that's fine, but maybe Delaware schools do. Okay, fine. Using that same logic, why does that not apply here to the concepts that are covered in HB 616? Because what is actually happening right now is that local school boards are addressing these issues. We've seen it across the state. Equality Ohio has been watching these issues, these fights, these discussions are happening at the local school board level. And I would argue that that is where they belong, in the local communities. And so I would ask the Ohio legislature and those who are supporters of both this bill and HB 99 to just have the same respect for parents and for local school boards in one instance that they are having in the other. I just want them just keep the same logic. That's all. If we're doing it one way, we're doing it one way. If we're doing it another, we're doing another. Just keep the same logic, apply the same standards to everything.
And that's a great question, because both sponsors voted yes on House Bill 99. So I think that is especially poignant to be able to ask them that question.
So what you're saying is, again, let me summarize. And if we trust local districts or leadership on the local level to make decisions to protect youth in this one area, it seems like you're saying we should trust them to make those decisions to protect youth and students in all areas. Like consistency, something of that nature. Am I hearing you correctly?
That's consistency, and if any attorneys are out there, consistency is one of the hallmarks of the law. It's a way that we can move through society and know what to expect. Let's just have some consistency.
I like that. Thank you. Tom?
Oh, thank you, Erin. That's an excellent point, I think, as well as the inconsistency. Unfortunately, I think, we know this is a coordinated national strategy. We know that this isn't standalone bill, that there's other bills. There's 454. There's a concerted attack on our trans community specifically. And we know why it's happening. We know that this is political in nature and that it's timed with the midterms. And then we'll see it again for the presidential. So we know all that. And so unfortunately, and you asked what I'd say to the sponsors. I do think that there are differences between folks who actually sponsor legislation and why they're doing it versus maybe people are trying to decide what to do, or the folks who just go along to get along because that's what their parties decided to do. So there's a lot in there. There's a lot in there. My biggest thing that I would say is, do you realize the harm that your political calculation has on these kids and on our trans community? Do you realize the hurt? Do you understand that? Do you get that your political calculation is actually hurting people and that some people might choose to kill themselves? That you actually could be costing someone's life. Do you realize that? Do I think it will get through? I don't know, but I hope that that type of messaging can get through because it's true. It's the truth. And it really is hurting people. And it's just a shame. It's a shame.
I appreciate that, Tom. And I know I always question too, would that get through? Because unfortunately, we know something else is driving their decisions and their will to initiate these types of things. Because if it really were about saving folks and protecting them and all of these great flowery words, we know what love looks like. Love doesn't look like ostracizing people, marginalizing them, oppressing them, erasing them. That's not what love looks like. And so I absolutely agree with that. I see there's a question about, are we aware of any legal challenges in the works for states that have already passed similar laws, such as Florida? I don't know that for sure. I don't know, Siobhan, if you know that.
I don't know of any right now, and I know that those can take a long time to put together. So I would say keep your eyes open and keep watching for that. Just because we haven't seen it yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
And I think there have been some challenges to some anti-CRT bills specifically. This bill is unique because it is sort of a mashup of two different things. But I can't think of the states off the top of my head, so I will follow up with United Way and get that info if I can find that and have that sent out.
Thank you. And I was doing a quick research just because I saw Canton City Schools recently voted to condemn House Bill 616. I know that Cincinnati Public Schools have. I don't know that Columbus City Schools have. I hadn't seen anything. Great, thank you. I was going to make that call to action. But I think there, some folks ask what's one thing you can do. And looking at your local school districts, for those of your friends or family across the state, you're a taxpayer, whether you have children that you're caring for or not, you're still a taxpayer and it still represents you. I think that would be one thing that you could initiate or encourage at the local level. We also have power too. And I think, is there a final thing that you all want to say? We have about 5 more minutes. So what are your last words here? And you've already said so many great words. So I understand if you're like, no, I've emptied them all out today.
I guess I'll just, no, please. Okay, I guess I'll just remind folks and make sure folks understand that this bill is bad. It's terrible. It's harmful. And there is a lot more of this legislation sort of floating around now than I think there have been in any General Assembly that I've seen at my time in state politics. But I will say it isn't hopeless. This isn't a pointless struggle. This is a winnable struggle. This bill is not inevitable. You can push back on it. Your voice will be important. You should make sure that it's heard. And I know that it seems like a lot is happening all at once in a variety of different things. So it just can feel like all this weight is crushing on you and sort of weighing things down, and there's no hope, but there is. And nothing about this bill is inevitable. And I do believe that ultimately we will prevail in pushing back on this and other like bills. So don't give up and don't feel hopeless or as if this is too big of a problem for you and us to tackle.
Thank you.
And building on that, yes, absolutely, there is hope. Equality Ohio has tremendous hope in this moment. But I'm going to say, Tim is right. We have not faced this much anti-LGBTQ legislation in the existence of this organization. This is a moment like no other for us and for the state of Ohio. And we still have hope because we know that with 86 prides across the state of Ohio, there is LGBTQ acceptance and affirmation and love here. And so the key is to make sure that our legislature understands that, and they can't have a different Ohio than what absolutely exists. So yes, there is hope, but we got to pair that hope with action. So you got to be calling your legislators. Please, if you're not following Equality Ohio, we'll tell you when to get on the phone and do that. They have to hear from you. Please show up at your local school boards. Let them know that you're listening, you're paying attention, and that you care what's going on in your local community. And then vote. Vote in August, vote in November, vote like you love an LGBTQ plus person.
Damn, I'm definitely voting. And I would just say, I think I've been like overly emotional today. I apologize. I can't help it. It just, it gets my dander up. It gets my dander up. We've been doing this for a long time, but I will say that we've had a lot of victories. We've made a lot of progress. I am married to my husband. I have my pride flag flying out for the street. I am able to walk hand in hand through the park. I have two beautiful adopted children, and they're both legally both of ours, thanks to Jim Obergefell's decision, thanks to Equality Ohio, thanks to Stonewall, thanks to Kaleidoscope. There's so much good being done. There's so many good organizations. There's so many people who are trying to do the right thing. And this is what I would want to end on. And I'm going to be kind of schmaltzy, so bear with me. But my sister gave me this, and I think this is a really important message. It's called Inner Truth. And it says, to live my own truth, to speak my own voice, I pray every morning to make my own choice, to honor the sacred that lives here inside, to stand in the sunlight with no need to hide. The passion I long for is just to be me, to carve out a life as I finally see. With a lack of perfection, my soul understands, my heart knows new freedom to embrace who I am. And that's what I want for my kids. That's what I want for myself. That's what I want for all of you. And, we might have some setbacks, but we won't keep doing it.
Thank you so much for that. And Tom, your emotions are showing your human side. And one of the ways that we try to divide and conquer people is to dehumanize them. And so at the end of the day, lifting up all of our humanity, connecting all of our humanity, and understanding that, Black and brown young folks, Black people, Black community, LGBTQ folks, all of us, we are actually humans. And if we can continue to lift up our inherent dignity, continue to lift up our humanity, and to affirm people just as they are, those are the kind of things that give me hope. And I know at KYC, we believe in doing the work of what's possible. And we know something different is possible in this world. And the more that we have these conversations and we speak up and we speak out and we share our humanity, I definitely believe that we will get to see something different. So thank you, all of you, for sharing your wisdom. Feel free to put information in the chat if you want to do your websites, if you haven't already. Thank you, those of you who listened, asked questions, those of you who are allies. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you to the United Way of Central Ohio for giving us this opportunity to have a smart and informed and humanity-based conversation. Have a great rest of the day, everyone.